The Plague by Zhou Dedong. Fleeing the plague god Qinan left Xijing with his son before the plague had spread on a large scale. No one knew how this sudden plague first appeared. Before long it had swept across the country, and then infected people began turning up all over the world. This was a new virus. It came on fiercely and arrived without warning. Human beings had no answer for it. For the time being, it was given the name Audiobook. People infected with Audiobook had an incubation period of 3 weeks. Their symptoms were an alternating fever and chill over the whole body, and they generally died within 3 days. Xijing was a place where the plague ran wild. Qinan longed to grow wings and fly back to his hometown. His hometown was a small city in the north called Tao County. It was surrounded by mountains, closed off from the world, and sparsely populated. There were not many outsiders there, so it should have been a little safer. This had been a wise choice on his and his wife's part. He did not dare take a plane. Airplanes were too enclosed. If even one passenger happened to be infected with Audiobook, that would be extremely dangerous. So he bought 2 soft sleeper train tickets. His son, Qi Mengling, was only 6 and did not need a separate berth, but he still bought one anyway, simply to take up another space. That way there would be 1 fewer person in the compartment, and 1 less source of danger, at the time. He and his son were wearing masks, 1 large and 1 small. The other 2 passengers squinted at them, clearly laughing at how they were treating every shadow as a threat. Qinan and his son changed trains at 3 Trees and boarded a coach bound for Dao County. From 3 Trees to Dao County was a road of 450 li. Every time Qinan went home, one of his friends used to drive out to the provincial capital to meet him. That friend was the director of the county government office. But this time the friend claimed he had urgent business and could not get away, so Qinan had no choice but to take the long-distance bus. For the first time, he felt that the distance between people had suddenly grown much greater. The empty park. Qinan's mother had prepared a room for her son and grandson, who had come home to take shelter. A large bed with brand new bedding. There was an old black dressing table with a half-round mirror standing on it. Both the dressing table and the mirror were far too old. Some of the silvering on the mirror had flaked away, leaving it mottled and patchy. The mirror reflected the whole bedroom, but vaguely, without any clarity at all. Of course, the room inside the mirror was exactly like the one outside it. Perhaps because the big mirror was so unclear, his parents had bought a smaller one and placed it on the dressing table. This little mirror was also half-round. Apparently his parents had picked that shape on purpose. They were careful people. Every morning after washing his face, Qinan would pick up the little mirror and look at himself. The little mirror was very new and it showed a person with perfect clarity. Qinan was a sensitive man. He always suspected that his nose was dirty. After he returned to Dao City, the enormous shadow of the plague had already covered the place within just a few days. It was the same as Xijing now. Schools had suspended classes, shops had closed their doors, and factories had stopped work. There were only a few pedestrians on the streets. They were wrapped up tightly, all wearing masks and gloves, and only their eyes were visible as they watched their surroundings warily. The whole world had turned strange. Qinan and his son hardly ever went out. They hid at home like turtles retreating into their shells. When they were bored, they would look in the mirror. One night he saw a notice on television. On the 16th, the authorities had found an Audiobook-infected person on a train from Xijing to 3 Trees, and all passengers on that train were asked to go to local hospitals in the coming days for examination. He broke out in a cold sweat. He had been on that very train, but he did not dare take his son to the hospital for a checkup. He secretly stayed home, looking through the window at the fully armed epidemic prevention workers questioning and registering outsiders at the gate, and at the people with disinfectant sprayers on their backs walking back and forth through the community. Qinan spent 2 terrified days. And then television broadcast another notice. On the 18th, another Audiobook-infected person had been found on the train from Xijing to 3 Trees. The enormous shadow of the plague pressed in around him, drifting at his sides. The epidemic grew more and more serious. The number of deaths reported on television rose at a frightening speed, and suspected cases flooded in like a tide. Qinan began to doubt whether fleeing here had really been the right decision. Although Xijing was the #1 epidemic zone, it was still a large city after all, with good medical conditions. Once an infected person was discovered, the epidemic response system could swing into action at once. Rescue workers would rush to the scene as fast as possible. Patients would be transported in time. Treatment would begin in time. And there would still be a sliver of hope for survival. But Tao County, this remote little city, had only 2 shabby hospitals. Qinan even doubted whether they could perform an appendectomy properly. If he or his son really contracted oddity here, it would be disastrous. They would be forcibly isolated, unable to move a single step, with no wings to fly away. But they could not return to Xijing now. Roadblocks had been set up at every entrance to Tao City. He could only pray every day that a great biologist like Louis Pasteur would appear soon and decipher the source of this oddity for humankind. That day, K. Mengling could no longer endure this prison-like life and cried and begged his father to take him out to play. K. Nan worried that his son's childish spirit might grow mold, so he agreed. His family lived on the southern outskirts of Tao City. Not far away was a peach blossom park. In ordinary times there were not many visitors there, and now in such extraordinary circumstances, he expected there would not be a single soul. Before they went out, Kinan told his son, "Do not go near strangers, and absolutely do not talk to them." Ki Mengling nodded again and again. Sure enough, Peach Blossom Park was empty, with not a single person in sight. Even the door to the management office at the gate was locked. Ki Mengling ran happily along the pebble path, while Ki Nan followed at an unhurried pace behind him. The sun shone lazily overhead by then. Both of them had taken off their masks. On both sides of the pebble path grew many enormous cannas, red as blood. The sun ran farther and farther ahead. In front of him was a large stand of trees, all lilacs covered with purple blossoms so thick and lavish they seemed to glow. In the middle of the grove was a small open space with a stone table and 4 smooth stone stools. Kinan walked over and sat down to rest. The park was so quiet that even the buzzing of bees and butterflies could be heard clearly. He felt as if he had seen this scene before, but he could not think where. He closed his eyes and searched through his memory, and suddenly he thought of strange tales from a Chinese studio. How much this looked like a scene in one of those stories, a nest of foxes taking human form. Living with wife and children in an abandoned garden. At night they would set out a jug of wine among the flowers, invite 1 or 2 friends over, and recite poetry while drinking. Where human footsteps rarely go, spirits and strange things are born. Ki Nan suddenly sat up, and at once felt how frighteningly still it was here. He had not heard his son's voice for quite a while. He called out several times, but no one answered. Panic seized him. He shouted as he searched through the grove, threading his way between the trees, and in the end, he found his son in a gap between a cluster of lilacs, crouched there quietly and playing with dirt. Ki Nan pulled him up and said, "Come on, let's go, we have to get home." After the father and son left Peach Blossom Park, Ki Nan felt calmer. Then he suddenly remembered the camera in his shoulder bag and thought he should take a photograph at the gate, so that when he went back to Xijing later, he would have a keepsake of this trip to flee the plague god. He took out the camera, told his son to stand in place, adjusted the focus, set it on the tripod, and then quickly ran behind his son, placing both hands on his shoulders. There was not a single person around. The sun was bright beyond measure. He forced out a grin, and at that moment the self-timer clicked. The instant the camera went click, an inexplicable and unlucky image flashed through his mind. A black and white figure smiling faintly from a memorial portrait draped with black cloth and white flowers. He hurriedly put the camera away, and he and Ki Mengling each put their masks back on and went home. He did not know that he had already brought someone home with him. Lie. Changing faces that night after eating the squash soup with bean flour rolls his mother had made, Ki Nan took his own temperature and his son's temperature separately. Both were normal, and he felt much more at ease as he lay down. Ki Mengling was in preschool, but he had not learned much of anything for more than a month, and Ki Nan was anxious. Every night he told his son little stories meant to teach him something. That day he told him about germs and viruses. More than 100 years ago, a strange silkworm disease broke out in France, and large numbers of diseased silkworms died. Scientists observed them through a microscope and found an oval-shaped particle on the 6 silkworms and on the mulberry leaves they had eaten. Later, only after all the diseased silkworms and leaves were burned, did they bring a silkworm epidemic that had shocked Europe under control. Not long after that, scientists began studying rabies. Under the microscope, they observed the brains of mad dogs and found no germs. But when the brains of those mad dogs were injected into healthy dogs, the healthy dogs died at once. Later, scientists discovered a biological pathogen even smaller than germs, the virus. "Dad, what is oddity?" Ki Mengling asked. "We do not know yet." "Was it spat out by silkworms?" "No." "Did it crawl out of a mad dog's brain?" "No, that is not it either." "Then where did it first come from?" The first person to get oddity was someone from the eastern coast. Everyone else was infected by him. Oh, so that means it was made by people. No, maybe he was a good person. As they talked, Kim Mengling grew drowsy. Under the dim moonlight, he closed his eyes heavily. His face was blurred and full of shadow. Nan was sleepy too. He looked at his son dazedly. The child was half in a dream and half awake, half in darkness and half in light, with his eyes only slit open. Watching him like that, Nan's mind grew more and more muddled. At last his eyelids also began to droop little by little. Suddenly, his son shuddered and stared at Nan in terror. His eyes filled with alarm. Nan thought he must have been seized by a nightmare and asked softly, "Mengling, what's wrong?" In the dark, Mengling said in a small voice, "Dad, just now I saw you were not you anymore." Nan felt a chill rise up his spine and immediately asked, "Who do you think I am?" Mengling said, "I saw you turn into a stranger." Nan held his son close and said, "You were dreaming. Go back to sleep." Mengling rolled his eyes and looked at Nan a few more times and finally closed them. Nan felt that what his son had said was a little eerie. He thought of that lonely garden, the lilac trees, the stone table, the stone stools. Could there really be some spirit there? His heart thudded for a long while, but seeing that his son was already sleeping soundly, he did not dwell on it. He slowly closed his eyes again. No one knew how much time had passed. He was almost asleep when he suddenly felt the son in his arms twitch. Then, with a violent push, the boy shoved him away and bolted upright. Nan was startled awake. He opened his eyes wide and said, "What is it now?" By then, all trace of sleep had left him. The child stared at him fixedly. After a long while, he said, "Why have you turned into that man again?" Nan felt a coldness crawl up his backbone. He said gently, "Son, you are dreaming again." As he spoke, Nan sat up and let the moonlight fall squarely on his face, so his son could see him clearly. At the same time, he reached out and touched the boy's forehead. It was soaked in cold sweat. Nan helped him lie back down and gently stroked his head. "It is nothing. Sleep. Go back to sleep, son. Sleep." As he spoke, he deliberately closed his eyes and made himself look calm. After a while, he opened his eyes slightly and looked. His son was still in the dark, staring straight at him with wide eyes. Nan could not help shivering. "Why are you still not asleep?" "I am afraid." In fact, Nan had also been frightened by the boy's abnormal behavior. Anger suddenly flared in him. "What nonsense are you talking about in the middle of the night? Go to sleep." When Mengling saw that his father was angry, he had no choice but to close his eyes obediently. Still, Nan could feel that his body had never relaxed. It remained stiff as a board, and he kept shrinking back as far as possible as though he were terribly afraid of Nan. Nan continued stroking his head. When his son had been an infant and got frightened, he would cry all night long. His wife would soothe him like this too, murmuring, "Rub the hair, and fear will not dare come near." It took a very long time before the boy's body slowly loosened. He was about to fall asleep, but Nan had lost all trace of sleep. He quietly withdrew his hand and looked around the bedroom. The dressing table took shape only faintly in the darkness, and the more he looked at it, the more uncanny it seemed. The mottled old mirror was even more unfathomable. At that moment, Nan suddenly thought of a terrible question. Had his son contracted that disease and come down with a high fever? He reached out again and touched the boy's forehead. It did not seem hot or cold. The night was so still that only the poplar trees outside the window could be heard rustling softly, as if muttering to themselves. There was no movement from the other bedroom. His parents were asleep too. Nan gradually sank into sleep. Before long, his son woke him for the third time. He opened his eyes and saw the boy backed into the corner, pointing at him and screaming, "Ghost! Ghost!" His hair stood on end. In a flurry, he turned on the light, looked around in panic, and then let his gaze fall on his son's face. Mengling stared at him blankly and stopped crying out. Nan's mother came running over in her clothes, asking anxiously, "What happened? What is wrong with you two?" Mengling stood up, threw himself into his grandmother's arms, and cried, "Grandma, I want to sleep with you." All right, Mengling will sleep with Grandma." His mother picked him up and then asked softly, "Tell Grandma, why do you not want to sleep with your father?" Mengling clung tightly to his grandmother's neck, burying his head on her shoulder as though he did not dare look back even once. Crying and struggling, he said, "Grandma, let's go. Hurry, let's go." Keenan said, "Mom, he may have been frightened. Take him over there." After his son left, the room suddenly felt empty. Keenan instinctively looked at the large mirror on the dressing table. It was dark and murky, like the entrance to another world. He stacked the two pillows together to raise his head and stared blankly. After a while, he looked once more at the large mirror on the dressing table. IV. Who was he the next morning? When Keenan got up, he saw his son kicking a soccer ball in the living room. The boy saw him and immediately stopped, saying in a hurt voice, "Dad, where did you go? When?" "Last night. I did not go anywhere. I stayed in the bedroom with you. Did you forget?" "No. The person who held me to sleep last night was not you." Keenan trembled all over and asked, "If it was not me, then who was it?" "A stranger." "A stranger? What did he look like?" "He never spoke. He just grinned." A chill rushed from the soles of Keenan's feet all the way to the top of his head. He stood there stunned for a while before finally saying, "Child, that was a nightmare." In the afternoon, Keenan took the film into town to have it developed. Wearing his mask, he walked several streets before he finally found a photo shop that was still open. It was in a quiet alley, with a small and brightly colored storefront. Inside sat an equally small and brightly colored girl. She was the first person Keenan had seen recently who was not wearing a mask. She said with a clear, bright voice, "Sir, please come back in 3 days to collect the prints." Keenan hesitated and asked, "Could it be a little faster?" "It will take at least 3 days," the girl said. At night, Keenan lay alone in the bedroom and felt very lonely. His son was determined not to sleep with him anymore, and his wife remained in Xijing because she was a doctor. Before Keenan left Xijing, she had not come home for a full week already. This was the longest time they had ever been separated, and he thought of her more and more. Every night before he slept, he would silently pray that his wife and all the medical staff would stay safe. Sometimes he thought bitterly, human medicine is often just a way of repairing the stable door after the horse has bolted, because human beings keep creating evil. Also, every night, Keenan would look at the large mirror on the dressing table several times. He found that this had become a subconscious movement of his. He was growing more and more convinced that it was a strange mirror. At noon on the third day, while his parents and son were all napping, Keenan put on his mask, left the house alone, and went back to the photo shop. The photos were ready. Keenan glanced through them quickly and found no problem with the quality. As he was leaving, the girl gave him a faint smile and said, "Welcome back anytime." He smiled back at her and went out the door. When he returned home, his parents and son were still asleep. He tiptoed back into his bedroom, took out those photos, and examined them one by one. When he got to the one taken by the gate at the park, he looked at it very carefully. In the photo, both he and his son were smiling. His son looked mischievous and adorable, while his own smile was somewhat unnatural. His face was frozen somewhere between smiling and not smiling. Whatever the case, this photo was still precious as a special keepsake. Just as he was about to turn the picture over, Keenan's hand suddenly stopped. He had discovered a problem. There was an inexplicable person in the photo. This person was standing about 2 meters behind him, as if he had been about to walk past when the camera caught and fixed him in place. Keenan's brow furrowed more and more tightly. Taking a photo at the gate of a park and having one extra person in the frame would have been normal, because it was a public place. But Keenan clearly remembered that before taking the picture, he had looked around and there was no one at all nearby. He studied the stranger in the photo carefully. He was thin, dark, and had a long neck. He was staring blankly toward the camera lens. Keenan had never seen this person before. He had left his hometown to make his way in the world 10 years ago and seldom came back. By now to him, Tao City was full of strangers. If the person caught by chance in the frame happened to be someone he knew, that would have been strange. Yet he could not understand why. The moment he saw those eyes, he felt a chill run through him. He was afraid of this man's eyes. They were as unfathomable as the old mirror on the dressing table. Keenan suddenly felt that those eyes were inescapable. He grabbed one of his son's fairy tale books at random, tucked the photo inside it, and went on to the next one. He did not know that death had already taken shape. V. It was him. Please do not bring photographs of strangers home. Do you have any photographs of strangers at your house? Think about it carefully. For example, you bring home a friend's photograph, but it is actually a picture of him with another person, and you do not know the person standing beside him. For example, you buy a book, or borrow one, or rent one, and there is an author's portrait inside it. For example, You take a photo at some tourist attraction and accidentally include a few complete strangers in the frame, then bring the picture home. These images of strangers carried into your home by chance all have some deep connection with you. More often than not, they will bring you certain misfortunes. Hidden within this lies a scientific causal relation, and you can slowly come to understand the wondrous process of transformation in between. And yet Nan did not tear the picture up, he slipped it into the book instead. Still, his heart remained tied to it, heavy with weight. After looking through the photos for a while, he lay down on the bed and wanted to rest for a moment. The sky outside the window was a clear blue, and the sun was beautiful. He closed his eyelids. Before him was a field of brightness, as if the sunlight of the entire world had thrown itself against his face and was being intimate with him. He enjoyed it quietly for a while, and then suddenly felt a black shadow standing over his head, blocking the sunlight. Because the brightness before his eyes dimmed, he opened his eyes abruptly. The room was empty. There was no one there. He closed his eyes again, and before him it was still all brightness. After a while, the black shadow came again, and the darkness returned before his eyes once more. He thought perhaps this was a normal physiological visual reaction, and that people simply seldom observed the world after closing their eyes with such care. So he did not open them again. That black shadow seemed to remain standing in front of him the whole time. That noon, Nan dreamed of the many canas in the park. They really did look like beauties, deep red, plump and soft. It was Mengling who shook him awake. He opened his eyes and saw his son holding the photograph taken at the gate of the park. He must have been looking through that fairy tale book just now and found it. "What is it, son?" His son pointed at the person walking through the frame and said loudly, "Dad, the person who held me to sleep at night was this man." Nan sat bolt upright and asked, "Mengling, when we took this picture, did you see this person?" His son thought for a moment and said, "I did not see him." At once, Nan's heart was swallowed by darkness. He took the photograph, looked at the expressionless person in it once, and then suddenly raised his hand and tore him to pieces. After that, he strode into the bathroom and threw the scraps into the trash can. The topmost scrap was the man's head. One eyebrow had been torn away. One eye had been torn away, yet the other eye was still quietly looking at Nan. The world in the mirror. The television announced the epidemic every day. Tao City still had not found a single infected oddity case, but Nan learned from the news that more than a dozen medical workers at the hospital where his wife worked had already fallen ill. His heart rose and fell day after day, unable to find solid ground. Since he had returned to his hometown, that friend from the county government office had not called him even once. During this period, no one was gathering anywhere. Nan looked at himself in the mirror and discovered that he had grown fat. He had been back for more than half a month, eating and sleeping like a pig every day, and had put on a full layer of fat. Of course, the mirror he was looking into was the small one. Mengling slept with his grandparents. The experts said that during this period one had to rest more and strengthen resistance. Nan did not want to watch television anymore. Drug commercials sprang up on TV like bamboo shoots after the rain, shouting every which way, "Improve immunity, improve it, improve it." He sat on the mushroom-shaped stool with his back to the dressing table, holding the little mirror and examining his face up close. He felt that being a little fatter looked better on him. Without thinking much about it, he shifted his gaze and glanced at the large mirror behind him through the little mirror. He was suddenly startled in the large mirror reflected by the little mirror. There was actually a strange room, and in that room stood a person in a blurry outline, stretching his neck and staring blankly at him. The little mirror in Nan's hands dropped with a sharp clatter, fell to the floor, and shattered. One shard even cut his ankle, and it hurt. He turned back sharply and discovered that he was already inside the room in the mirror. There was a bed in this room as well, and a dressing table, and a large half-round mirror standing on it. But this bed was not the one in his own bedroom. It was square and rigid, without the slightest decorative touch. The bedding and pillows on it were all white, monotonous like a hospital room. And this dressing table was not the one in his own bedroom either. It too was plain in shape without curves, but it was white, solemn and severe. Nan was sitting with his back to this dressing table, in the same posture as before. It was as though he had fallen from a positive space into a negative one. The person stood in the center of the room, staring straight at him. Without question, this was the same person who had appeared in the photograph at the gate of the park. Nan was dumbstruck. This person had inexplicably appeared in a two-dimensional photograph, and now he had actually dragged Nan out of three-dimensional space and into the two-dimensional world of the mirror. "Who are you?" Keenan asked. The man shook his head and said, I do not know who I am. Where did you come from? I do not know where I came from either. As he spoke, the man lowered his head. At that moment, Keenan turned and looked at the large mirror on the dressing table. The mirror actually showed his own bedroom. Could it be that there really was another adjacent room beside the bedroom? Could it be that the big mirror really was made of glass? He turned back and asked the man, trembling, Am I in? The mirror Keenan's body suddenly felt as light as a feather. You once tore me apart just like this, the man said while reaching up to grab his own head. And with a rip he tore away everything above his eyebrows. Then with another rip he tore away one of his eyes. In his mutilated state, he stared at Keenan, and that remaining eye shot out a friendly light. Why do you only appear in photographs and mirrors? The man did not answer Keenan's question. Instead, he said, I remember now. You all call me Oddity. Keenan's heart dropped into a freezing abyss and quickly turned to ice, hard as a plumb bob. At present, you people are isolated from one another. In fact, from the very beginning, you have always been isolated from one another. Now I am going to forcibly link you together. Keenan tried to taste the meaning of what he was saying. The man went on. Oh right. 3 days from now, they will see me in your blood, but they will need an electron microscope. Keenan sprang to his feet and smashed headfirst into the mirror on the dressing table. It broke with a crash. At the same time, he woke up. It was a dream. He turned his head and looked toward the terrifying large mirror on the dressing table. It really had shattered. Only the half-round frame remained, revealing the black wall behind it. Fev. Quarantine. This dream was too bizarre. Keenan was certain it was not without cause. Otherwise, why had the mirror shattered? The fear of death covered him completely, and he could no longer sleep. By then it was a little after 3 in the morning. He lay still like a corpse, with only his eyes blinking after a while. He got up, stepped down from the bed, and slowly walked into the bathroom. He switched on the light and looked into the trash can. The torn-up man was staring at him under the bright white light. He backed out, turned off the light, and returned to the bedroom to lie down again. After only a short while, he rose once more, restless and uneasy. While his parents and son were all fast asleep, he stuffed the bedsheet, duvet cover, and pillowcase he had slept on into the washing machine and started it up. Then he disinfected his room thoroughly and began to wash up. At the end, he packed all his toiletries into his backpack, took some money and prepared to leave. In the corridor, he ran into his mother. Normally, she never got up this early. Where are you going? I am going to 3 Trees for a business meeting. At a time like this, you should not go out. I have already made an appointment with them. His mother sighed. Then when will you come back? It may take longer. As he said this, he lowered his eyes and said softly, Mom, Mengling is in your hands. Go on, do not worry. After I leave, you all must be careful. No matter who it is, if anyone feels even a little unwell, go to the hospital immediately for a checkup. All right, all right. After saying everything he needed to say, Keenan went straight toward his parents' bedroom, wanting to take one last look at his son. His father was awake too, and asked him, What was making noise in your room just now? The mirror broke, Keenan said. His son was still asleep, his long eyelashes as calm as slowly falling goose feathers in the snow. Keenan bent down and very much wanted to inhale his scent greedily, but in the end he did not dare. He stood there silently looking at him. Only after several minutes did he leave. After daybreak, Keenan went to the People's Hospital. The hospital had already set up a special clinic for Oddity. Several medical workers had just put on isolation suits, wrapped tightly so that only their eyes could be seen. As soon as Keenan entered the consulting room, all of them looked over at him alertly. Doctor, I think I have Oddity, Keenan said, standing straight in the doorway. The medical staff looked at one another. One doctor, who was a little plumper, said gently, Come over here and sit down. So he walked over and sat down. The plump doctor took out a strange-looking instrument and shone it on his forehead, then said, There is no problem. Keenan looked up at him and said sincerely, Please isolate me immediately. I know there is something wrong with me. The plump doctor smiled. You are being too nervous. I am in the incubation period, Keenan shouted. During the incubation period for this disease, even doctors cannot detect it. How could you know? Go home. The other medical workers all laughed, and then each went back to their own tasks, no longer paying him any mind. Kenan walked out of the people's hospital in low spirits, not knowing where else to go. He did not dare go home. He was afraid of bringing the oddity virus to his son or his parents. In the end, he checked into a hotel. This hotel was directly opposite that small, brightly colored photo shop. Kenan had nothing to do, so he pressed himself against the window and looked across the street, hoping to see the small, brightly colored girl. But the window opposite was a black hole and nothing could be seen. He thought that perhaps he really was fine, and so he hoped time would pass quickly. If nothing happened after 3 days, he could go home. At dawn on the 3rd day, Kenan suddenly felt extremely ill. One moment he was cold, the next hot, as if he had been thrown by some enormous force into the boundless void of space, flung now onto the burning sun, now onto the freezing moon. In one brief instant of clarity, he dialed the local emergency number. After that, he dimly felt that several people in snow-white isolation suits came into the room, placed him on a narrow stretcher, and carried him out. The people in the hotel immediately understood what had happened as soon as they saw the scene, and everyone in the corridor disappeared in an instant. In the isolation ward, Kenan gradually fell into a coma. Dimly, he saw Peach Blossom Park. There was not a single person at the empty gate. The sun hung high in the sky, glaring so brightly it hurt. At that moment, a strange young man and woman ran over. They were a couple. The man took a camera out of his backpack and adjusted it carefully. Kenan immediately walked toward them in a blank trance. Like a zombie, he stood behind the woman. The woman turned to look around, and then said to the man, "There is no one here. Take the photo quickly." The end.